China is the world's biggest exporter of cars, but less than 2% of them are shipped to the United States.
European and UK customers seeing China can produce high quality and very good technology products.
China just rolled out electric vehicles that cost about the same as a decent used car in America. We're talking $10,000 EVs.
The Chinese giant taking on Tesla, offering cars for as little as $10,000.
That actually work, not some stripped-down golf cart. While Tesla sells Model 3s for $40,000 and legacy automakers scramble to break the $30,000 barrier, Chinese companies are already moving metal at prices that seemed impossible just a few years ago.
Where much of the auto industry is increasingly automated, the sky is the limit in terms of what they can produce. That is going to have the effect of just pulling down prices, and that's going to hurt Western automakers that are trying to compete with these.
This isn't vaporware or some distant promise. These cars are on roads right now, and they're about to change everything we thought we knew about the car industry. The $10,000 electric car reality. The Wuling Hongguang Mini EV kicked off this revolution with a starting price around $4,500, though calling it a full car is generous. It's tiny, seats 4 uncomfortably, and has a range of about 75 miles. Think of it as China's answer to a golf cart that's street legal. But here's where it gets interesting. Over 400,000 units sold in its first year alone. That's not a niche product, that's a phenomenon. Then there's the BYD Seagull, which starts around $10,000 and actually resembles what most people would consider a proper car. It's a compact hatchback with a 190-mile range, modern styling, and features like a rotating touchscreen. The Cherry QQ ice cream sits in a similar price bracket, offering basic transportation with an electric motor. These aren't luxury vehicles by any stretch, but they've got air conditioning, power windows, and increasingly sophisticated infotainment systems. The Chang'an Lumen and Geely's Geometry EX3 also occupy this space, each offering slightly different configurations, but sharing one crucial trait. They're affordable enough that millions of Chinese consumers who'd normally buy a gas-powered compact can now go electric without breaking the bank. The build quality varies, and the materials inside scream budget, but they're functional transportation that happens to produce zero emissions. The question isn't whether these cars exist anymore. The question is why they exist at such low prices when everyone else struggles to make EVs profitable. How China made it possible. China didn't just stumble into becoming the world's EV factory. They planned it. For over a decade, Beijing pumped subsidies into electric vehicle development, both for manufacturers and buyers. Local governments offered license plate exemptions, a huge deal in cities where getting a gas car registered can cost thousands of dollars and require winning a lottery. They built charging infrastructure at a pace that makes other countries look asleep at the wheel. But the real advantage is vertical integration. Chinese EV makers control their supply chains in ways Western companies can only dream about. CATL, the world's largest battery maker, is Chinese. So are most of the companies mining and processing the lithium, cobalt, and other materials that go into those batteries. When you control everything from raw materials to final assembly, costs plummet. There's no markup at each stage, no negotiating between independent companies trying to maximize their own profits. Labor costs matter too, though not as much as you'd think. Modern car factories are highly automated, so wages represent a smaller piece of the pie than they used to. Still, Chinese manufacturing wages remain lower than in Europe, Japan, or America, and regulations around worker conditions, while improving, are less stringent. Factory buildings themselves cost less to construct and operate. Then there's scale. China is the world's largest car market, period. When you're building hundreds of thousands of identical units, your per unit costs crater. Dies, molds, and tooling get amortized across massive production runs. Engineers can optimize every cent out of the manufacturing process because the volumes justify that attention to detail. BYD alone produced over 3 million new energy vehicles in 2023. That's the kind of scale that makes $10,000 EVs mathematically possible. The government's role extends beyond direct subsidies. Cheap land for factories, preferential loans from state banks, and local government investment in EV companies create an ecosystem where failure is cushioned and success is amplified. It's industrial policy executed with precision, and it's worked exactly as intended. The technology inside. Pop the hood on a $10,000 Chinese EV and you'll find compromises everywhere, but also some clever engineering. The batteries use lithium iron phosphate chemistry, or LFP. These batteries are cheaper than the nickel-cobalt alternatives in premium EVs, more stable, and last longer. The trade-off? Lower energy density, meaning you need more battery for the same range and worse performance in extreme cold. For most Chinese drivers in temperate regions, that's a perfectly acceptable compromise. The motors are simpler, often single-speed transmissions that get the job done without the complexity of multiple gears. Acceleration is adequate but not thrilling. Top speeds are limited, sometimes to just 60 or 70 mph, which is fine for city driving but means highway merging requires planning. Suspension systems use cheaper components, giving a bouncier ride. Soundproofing is minimal, so road noise is a constant companion. Inside, you'll find hard plastics where luxury cars use soft-touch materials. Seats are cloth, not leather. But here's what surprises people. The tech is often pretty good. Large touchscreens, smartphone connectivity, and even basic driver assistance features have become standard because these components are now cheap to produce at scale. A touchscreen costs way less than a complex array of physical buttons and knobs. Weight savings happen everywhere possible. Thinner glass, smaller batteries, less sound deadening, simpler door mechanisms. Every kilogram removed is either cost saved or range extended. These cars often lack advanced safety features standard in Western markets. Fewer airbags, no blind spot monitoring, simpler collision avoidance. They meet Chinese safety standards, which are improving but still trail European or American requirements. The brilliant part is that Chinese engineers figured out what customers actually need versus what manufacturers assumed they wanted. Turns out, people buying a $10,000 EV don't care about 0 to 60 times or premium audio systems. They want reliable transportation that doesn't cost much to run. By ruthlessly eliminating anything non-essential, Chinese makers created a product that works for its market. The global industry's reaction panic might be too strong a word, but legacy automakers definitely aren't sleeping well. European manufacturers, who've dominated global car exports for decades, suddenly face competitors that can undercut them by tens of thousands of dollars. Volkswagen, once betting big on its China sales, now watches Chinese brands eat its market share. The company's response? Partnerships with Chinese firms and plans for their own budget EVs. But those are still years away and unlikely to match Chinese prices. American automakers largely shrugged off the threat initially. The US market has high safety and emission standards, plus tariffs that effectively block cheap Chinese imports. But companies like Ford and Chima know they're losing the developing world. Markets in Southeast Asia, South America, and Africa, where American brands once competed, are now flooded with affordable Chinese EVs that locals can actually afford. Japanese and Korean manufacturers face perhaps the biggest crisis. Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai built their reputations on affordable, reliable transportation. That's exactly what Chinese EV makers now offer, plus the benefits of electric drivetrains. Toyota, committed to hybrid technology for years, is scrambling to catch up on pure EVs. Hyundai and Kia have competitive products but can't match Chinese prices. The response strategies vary. Some companies are moving production to China to tap into those supply chains and lower costs. Others lobby their governments for protection through tariffs and regulations. The EU launched investigations into Chinese EV subsidies, clearly aiming to justify trade barriers. The US imposed steep tariffs on Chinese vehicles, but protectionism only works at home. It doesn't help compete in third markets. A few Western companies are trying the partner and learn approach. Stellantis invested in Leapmotor. Volkswagen deepened its Chinese partnerships. The hope is to absorb Chinese cost efficiency while maintaining brand prestige. Whether that works remains to be seen. Meanwhile, premium brands like BMW and Mercedes feel somewhat insulated since they're not competing on price. But even they're nervous as Chinese manufacturers move upmarket with brands like NIO and Zeekr. The market impact and export strategy. Inside China, the transformation is already complete. EVs represent over a third of new car sales, with that percentage climbing monthly. Cities like Shenzhen have electric taxi fleets and buses. Charging stations outnumber gas stations in some urban areas. Chinese consumers, especially younger ones, increasingly see gas cars as outdated technology. The $10,000 EVs democratize this transition, making electric vehicles accessible to the middle class and even working class families. BYD now outsells Tesla globally. Let that sink in. A company most Americans couldn't identify 5 years ago sells more EVs than Elon Musk's operation. That happened because BYD focused on affordable models while Tesla chased premium margins. The strategy worked brilliantly in a price-sensitive market like China and increasingly in developing countries. Export expansion is happening systematically. Southeast Asia came first. Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam now see Chinese EVs proliferating. These markets have growing middle classes, government incentives for EV adoption, and infrastructure developing rapidly. South America followed, with Brazil becoming a particular focus. Mexican factories are being built, positioning Chinese makers right next to the US market, even if they can't easily sell directly into it yet. Europe represents the biggest prize. Despite tariffs and regulatory scrutiny, Chinese EVs are gaining footholds. BYD opened showrooms in Germany and the UK. MG, owned by Chinese company SAIC, already has significant European market share. The cars entering Europe aren't the $10,000 budget models, but slightly more expensive variants that still undercut European EVs by thousands. Tariffs and trade barriers are slowing the invasion, but not stopping it. The EU imposed tariffs up to 38% on Chinese EVs in 2024, and Chinese manufacturers just absorbed some costs and kept selling. The US maintains even steeper barriers, but Chinese companies are patient. They're building brand recognition in accessible markets, moving upscale, and waiting for opportunities. The markets most vulnerable are those without strong domestic auto industries or the political will for protectionism. Basically, the entire developing world. Countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia are choosing affordability over protecting non-existent local manufacturers. Chinese EVs offer them a chance to leapfrog directly to electric transportation without building out extensive gas infrastructure. What this means for the future. The race to affordable EVs is now the defining challenge for the global auto industry. Every major manufacturer has announced plans for budget electric models. Volkswagen promises EVs under $22,000 by 2027. Tesla talks about a $25,000 model. Nissan and Toyota have similar goals. But notice those prices are still double what Chinese competitors offer today. And by the time Western models launch, Chinese manufacturers will have improved further and possibly dropped prices more. A price war seems inevitable. Chinese companies have proven they can profit at $10,000. Western manufacturers struggle to break even at $30,000. As Chinese makers expand globally, they'll force everyone else to cut margins or lose market share. Some legacy automakers won't survive this transition. The industry overcapacity is real, and consolidation is coming. Can Western manufacturers actually compete? It depends on what you mean by compete. On price alone, probably not, at least not profitably. The supply chain and scale advantages China enjoys are structural and won't disappear. Western companies might match quality at higher prices or offer superior features that justify premiums. The luxury segment will likely remain contested, but the mass market, the hundreds of millions of people buying basic transportation, that's increasingly China's game to lose. Some wild cards could change things. Battery technology breakthroughs that favor Western companies seem unlikely given Chinese dominance in battery manufacturing. Political upheaval or conflict could disrupt Chinese export, but betting on geopolitical disaster isn't a business strategy. Western governments could decide EVs are strategic enough to subsidize heavily, matching Chinese industrial policy. But democratic politics make sustained, multi-decade industrial policy difficult. The democratization of EVs is perhaps the most significant outcome. For decades, environmental advocates pushed electric vehicles, while critics noted they were luxury items for wealthy countries and people. That argument died when Chinese companies proved EVs can cost less than gas cars. 1 billion people who could never afford a Tesla might drive a BYD. That's transformative for emissions, for oil demand, and for the geopolitics of energy. Developing countries particularly benefit. They've been told to reduce emissions while lacking the wealth to afford expensive clean technology. Chinese EVs offer an actual path forward. A city in Indonesia can electrify its taxi fleet. A family in Brazil can go electric without financial strain. That's not theoretical anymore. It's happening right now. The charging infrastructure challenge remains. EVs are only as useful as the charging network supports them, and most developing countries lag behind China in infrastructure. But infrastructure follows adoption, and the affordable price point drives adoption. Investments will flow to meet demand. The shift is creating winners and losers that would have seemed impossible to predict 10 years ago. Chinese companies, once dismissed as copycats making inferior products, now set global standards for EV affordability. Japanese manufacturers, dominant for half a century yet, face existential questions. Oil exporters watch their long-term demand projections crater. Cities around the world suddenly have a realistic path to cleaning their air. The automotive industry employed tens of millions and shaped economies for over a century. That industry is being remade right now, faster than almost anyone expected. And the catalyst is a $10,000 electric car from China that most people outside Asia have never heard of. The next decade will determine whether this is a Chinese century for automobiles or whether the West can mount a comeback. Either way, the world is going electric, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than we thought.